Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick
This
Marotta.
is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hi, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Phil Green, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, we have a problem on Facebook. So if you're watching this is pre-recorded if you're watching on Facebook because Facebook is down right now. Anyhow, we're going to move forward and capture this on YouTube and on the LinkedIn side. My good friend Phil Green has ALS, and we've covered this a couple of times in the past, Phil, where we announced your diagnosis and then also did an update. And I guess it's time now to do another one. We do about one of these a year. And so, and we also had a really fun road trip recently where you and I got to go up north to the Bay and hang out with guys like James Otto and Jason. I can't remember Jason's last name, and then Mike Blaine. And Stephen Piscotti. Yeah, that's right. Jason Blaine. Yeah. And so it was really great to be able to do that, see a couple concerts, go see an A's game. Thanks to the A's for setting all this up. They're good to the ALS family. But I guess let's back up first here and talk about where you were before you had ALS, what it was like to get diagnosed, and then just kind of bring us up to the present with all the things that you're doing. And then I'm just going to shut up and get out of the way until you're done talking about that.
Sure. Well, thanks for bringing me back on and giving me a platform to help raise awareness and share my story. But my story is not just my story. It's other people's stories and struggles and trying to fix what's broken in the world of ALS. But in 2017, I was living a pretty much normal, healthy existence. And I started having twitching in my triceps, and my wife noticed it. And I the jokester that I am, just kind of played it off that, oh, hey, my triceps are just working out on their own. And that twitching migrated throughout my body over the course of about 9 months. And in about February timeframe, February 2018, figured, hey, this isn't going away. It's not getting any better. It's I'm twitching throughout my entire body. I probably should go see a doctor about this. So started the process to figure out what was going on with me. Dr. Google told me, it could be nothing, or it could be ALS or a pinched nerve, or who knows, an assortment of things. But ALS really struck out to me, because even though I did the Ice Bucket Challenge, I didn't really understand what the disease was. And given that out of all of those options, it was the one that was 100% terminal, I wanted to understand a little bit better about what this disease was that I possibly had. And as I went through the process of getting diagnosed, which is really a diagnosis of elimination of other things that it could be, and then you're left with ALS at the end, because ALS has no biomarkers that we can point to and definitively test for and say, hey, this person has ALS. It's a combination of observations and tests. One of the key tests is a EMG and nerve conduction study, which will tell you that your muscles are not transmitting and your nerves are not transmitting to your muscles appropriately or properly. But even that test is not definitive for ALS. And so you go through this process of ruling out certain types of cancers that might mimic ALS. I had multiple MRIs of my spine, through, up and down my spine, to rule out some sort of pinched nerves up and down my spine, which is highly unlikely because I had this occurring throughout my entire body. So in August of 2018, finally arrived at a diagnosis of ALS, which in about the July timeframe really started coming to grips with this is probably what the diagnosis is going to be. And that is the time where you're actually going, why me? It can't be. I'm healthy. I'm active. And that's where you start to realize that your life is no longer going to be the same as it had been previously. So when you get that diagnosis, the confirmed diagnosis months later, I was just, my wife and I were like, okay, it's what we thought it was. Now it's time to move on with our new life. And the one interesting thing about ALS is, well, there's a lot, but one of the things that is interesting about ALS is that it's a progressive disease that slowly takes away function throughout your body. So, and there are different types of ALS, and I have one called limb onset, which means my disease started in my limbs. And so I started seeing hand weakness, and then weakness in my legs, and then weakness in my arms. There are other types of ALS, like bulbar ALS, that it affects somebody's throat and ability to speak and swallow before it impacts their limb muscles. So, in short, ALS is a progressive disease where your motor neurons that communicate to your muscles that tell them to fire and do something, those motor neurons die. So when you don't have the ability to communicate to your muscles, those muscles end up dying. So those muscles end up dying or atrophying because of lack of use. So um, from my perspective, I'm still not convinced the muscle is diseased. There are some researchers and doctors that believe that to be the case, but um, really the issue is the motor neurons and how do we preserve those and keep them from dying? And yeah, that's the big mystery in ALS.
One of the things that struck me is as you're going through this process, it's just a long process to get diagnosed. You were at my Easter party. We were talking about you potentially dunking a basketball at 50, but also talking about these twitchy triceps. And we joked about it. And, I said, hey, could it be ALS? And you're like, I don't think so. Probably not. But you were early in the diagnosis process, but had had symptoms for quite some time. And then I was just struck by like, hey, come see the blood cancer specialist. He'll see you in 6 weeks. And then, all right, well, and that, and then it's like each time it was like these long gates of time in between getting that diagnosis and just waiting around, and getting maybe progressively worse if you're able to see it, but maybe not. So as you went through, were you frustrated by the time that it took to get through each gate? And then is there a test now that says, hey, you have ALS and it's a lot faster?
So I'll answer that last question first. No, there is not a test, but there are some promising biomarkers that I believe, as well as some of the top researchers in the world, believe that they are indicative of neurodegenerative diseases. You couple that with weakness in the limbs or um, evidence of bulbar function loss. And those biomarkers, I think, can be even, I mean, those particular biomarkers, they're called neurofilament light chain and neurofilament heavy. And those NFL and NFH for short, those actually show evidence of neurodegeneration before even the symptoms show up. So um, the challenge there is what's the baseline that you're measuring against, and you know the elevated neurofilament levels are really they are telling you your rate of neurodegeneration as opposed to the amount. So um, it's not a there is no definitive test yet, but there is effort throughout the entire globe by some of the top and smartest scientists that are trying to help solve that problem. Was I frustrated in my diagnostic journey? Yes. Um, just imagine being told that you may have a 100% terminal disease, but then also being told that the specialist you need to see is not available to see you for 2 months. So what am I just supposed to stay here for 2 months and just go on with my life as normal? It's in my opinion, very inconsiderate for anybody that might have this disease to make them wait months to see a doctor that can help give them the answers they need. Today, or at least when I was diagnosed, and it's true today, the reality is it doesn't really matter because even if you get diagnosed rapidly, there's not a lot that you can do other than participate in clinical trials for experimental or investigational therapies. Where this comes into play is a lot of ALS clinical trials have cutoffs on when you're eligible to participate based on time since symptom onset. So imagine if it takes a year and a half for you to get diagnosed and they have a cutoff at 18 months since symptom onset, you effectively, upon diagnosis, are ineligible for that particular clinical trial. So, it, from that perspective, that's um, time to diagnosis is critical in helping you get access to investigational therapies. The other key piece in this is in about 10% or less of people, there's evidence of family history or genetic history of ALS. So there are known genes that mutate and that are players in ALS disease pathology. So it is important if, well, okay, let me back up a little bit. The school of thought when I was diagnosed was, oh, if you don't have any family history, we don't need to give you a genetic test because you probably don't have a genetic mutation that is the primary reason for your ALS. If you do have a familial history, okay, give me the genetic test. And if I'm able to identify a certain gene mutation, there are clinical trials today targeting these gene mutations. The biggest issue with this is there I know 3 people that are still alive today that have gotten genetic testing, not by their clinician, but through other research arms that have no family history of ALS that tested positive for a known gene in ALS. So, and there's evidence now in some research that there are actually, I just read a paper last week about de novo gene mutations in people with ALS that don't have familial history, meaning that there are people that have a gene mutation of, for example, one of the genes is SOD1, and they have no family history. And believe it or not, they were not, upon diagnosis, offered a genetic test.
Mm.
But if they had been and they tested positive, they would have been eligible for a large Biogen clinical trial that targets SOD1 that's very promising. And I believe it's irresponsible, given what we have in today's investigational therapies targeting these genes, for any clinician that has somebody that they believe has possible ALS, not even confirmed definitive ALS, to get them genetic counseling first so they understand what they're up against and what this genetic test that they're potentially going to have means. And then if they, once they're informed and educated about what genetic testing in ALS means and the implications of it, offer them genetic testing. Because if they do test positive for one of these gene mutations, they have an option, they have hope. They can enroll in one of these clinical trials that targets these particular gene mutations. In my particular case, I've been tested 4 times, not by any clinic, but for research purposes. And every time the panel comes up as negative for any of the known gene mutations. Now, I use the word known because there's a word in ALS. You're either in the familial ALS side or the sporadic ALS side when you get diagnosed. 10% of the ALS population is considered familial or genetic. The remaining 90%, like me, are in the sporadic ALS camp. I really don't like that word sporadic, and I'm trying to change how people refer to the other 90%. And because from my perspective, there may be a gene that we don't know about yet that is the key player, or it could be polygenic pathology, meaning there are many genes at work that are trying or that contribute to somebody's disease onset. So I prefer, and I try to use the word undetermined instead of sporadic whenever I'm around top clinicians or researchers in ALS, and let them know that sporadic is kind of a cop out.
Yeah.
And we really, it's almost like they accept that, oh, well, we don't know what it is, so we're just going to call it sporadic.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like if we start using the word undetermined, that means we have work to do.
Yeah. No,
Figure out what's going on.
I want to jump in here and really quickly mention Jane Babcock, who's been putting some great comments in here in the feed. Her daughters have both been ALS caregivers. She notes that ALS is now officially a presumptive condition for all veterans. Veterans are twice as likely to get it. And let's talk about other groups that are likely to get it in a moment. I want to acknowledge Jane because she's been talking quite a bit. But let's go back to this sporadic thing because these words matter. It's a clinical word, right? It's a word that they use, but you're right. It means we don't know. It happens sometimes to some people, some of the times. And you're right. The work 90% basically is unknown. That's what they're saying. We just don't know what this is. We have some ideas, we have some hints, we have a circle over here. It's like putting a puzzle together and you got a couple of pieces that are all blue. And so you're like, these are the pieces that are all blue, but we know they're not the same pieces. We know they don't all go together. So that's one thing I want to clarify and I agree with you on. I want to back up because ideally we're not talking to the folks that have people with ALS because these folks already have a lot of this knowledge. And if you don't, for sure, I'll get you a link to Phil. You can go to IMALS. You can go to ALS Cure, ALS Project. Hang on. Let me pull these
ALS
links.
Cure Project.
Yeah. Let me get these up here. ALS Cure Project right there. And we'll get a couple other ones. So a couple things, and I want you to talk about them at length. This disease, again, because it's sporadic, right? Hits people that are wealthy as well as not wealthy. So there's Augie from Augie's Quest, and Augie Nieto is a wonderfully wealthy man. I mean, this is not something that like, oh, this is only for poor people. This gets everybody. The creator of SpongeBob, Steven Hillenberg, also was diagnosed with it, and I think she's a billionaire. Suna Kratch, I'm not sure exactly. Krayak, I'm not sure how she says her name. She's Turkish, but Suna Kuryak, I don't know. Anyhow, she's a billionaire, right? So this is not a disease for poor people. And the other thing is when you get this disease or this affliction, this malady, however you want to call it, Phil, your intention, and you're an athlete, you're a big, powerful, strong guy. You're like, well, I'm just going to work out. And I'm going to eat less. It's like you try to fight it like maybe it's cancer, just have a positive attitude. But ALS doesn't do that. It doesn't care if you work out. It definitely doesn't want you to lay around. So what are some of the misconceptions that you have early on when you're trying to decide what to do?
Yeah, your first inclination is, okay, I'm getting weaker. I need to work out that muscle so that it recovers and gets stronger. But the research points to working out that they call it sick muscle, which again, I'm not convinced, but I have muscle specialist researchers at the University of Washington that believe that it's diseased muscle as well. But that muscle doesn't recover like a normal muscle. So you can accelerate, in theory, the muscle weakness by working it out. I have exercises that I do twice a day with the help of a caregiver, but a lot of those are designed to maintain range of motion and flexibility. So I think that part of it's important. I do believe that lack of activity will also accelerate your atrophy as well. So I think you just have to be conservative in what you're doing and not go in and hit the gym like I used to, where I'm trying to build muscle. It's really about just trying to maintain use of that muscle for as long as possible. And ALS being a progressive disease, as you lose function, and you do lose function, it could be like any day you wake up, it could be the last day you're able to do something, because when you lose it, it's gone. So what I learned really quickly was keep doing the things I can do and do them while I still can do them, because once they're gone, you're not going to be able to do them anymore. So anybody that's listening, and that's one of the key things for anybody newly diagnosed, when you get that diagnosis, just look at yourself and go, okay, what can I still do today that I really enjoy doing? And go do that. That's not to say go. My clinician said, build a bucket list and go do those things. I'm not going to tell somebody not to do that, but that's not how I live my life. I want to make sure that I'm able to continue to enjoy the things that I enjoy today, or, for me 3 years ago, for as long as I can, because, like I said, you don't really appreciate that until it's gone. And it's just simple things like walking. I was walking to get the mail every day, and most people take for granted their ability to walk. But I knew that my ability to walk was going to be gone. So I walked to get the mail as long as I still could safely without any risk of falling. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, where you never know. With this disease, you could wake up one day and all of a sudden you can't do something, and it just slowly strips things from you, it steals things from you, one bit at a time. And the way I look at it is, as it robs you of things that you've been, for the most part, probably taken for granted. One, you appreciate the things you do have, but two, you adapt, and today becomes your new normal until something else gets taken away from you. So, um, yeah, I don't want to get too preachy on here.
And then let's talk about the financial capacity of people who get this affliction. Obviously, it attacks anybody, but also, what does it mean if you do have millions of dollars to fight whatever that means, fight the disease?
Well, most people don't have millions of dollars, although the disease does seem to target very ambitious and motivated people. A lot of athletes, a lot of people that deal with high stress in their careers. So I would say a lot of type A personalities get this disease. And like I said, it could be partly because of stress, or not just mental stress, but physical stress on the body. So there are ultra marathoners that get this disease. A lot of athletes that push their bodies to the limit get this disease. In my case, maybe it was the head trauma that contributed to my disease. We won't know that particular answer until after I'm gone. I've decided to donate my brain and spinal cord to UCSF for research, to help answer that question and look at the impact of traumatic brain injury on ALS, and is there a connection? So, but the financial side, we fought long and hard to make sure that since most of us aren't independently wealthy like Augie and a couple other folks that have been diagnosed with ALS, that upon diagnosis, you are immediately eligible for a Social Security disability insurance as well as Medicare. There was a waiting period when I was diagnosed, which seemed cruel, unusually cruel and unnecessary, to make people that have paid into the system wait to get access to the money to help support them, because in most cases you're not able to work anymore. So you need that money to help survive or maintain a certain quality of life. And thankfully, the House and the Senate agreed with us last year and approved the SSDI. They removed that waiting period for people with ALS. So now those people have access to those funds to help them maintain as much a normal life as possible. Like I said, most of us are not able to work anymore in a paid capacity. I work probably harder now than I did when I was fully employed, and that's just because I'm trying to fix what I see is broken in, we call it the ALS land, and that can be on the political legislative side to the regulatory side to companies that are developing ALS therapeutics, to ALS organizations not sharing research data. You name it, there's a lot that's broken in this disease. And so my unpaid job now is trying to fix that. But this disease, depending on where you're at in your journey or your progression, there are financial hits. So when you get diagnosed, in my case, we knew that I would not be able to walk. So we had to remodel our downstairs bathroom so it was accessible so that I could shower and use that in the future. I have a 2-story house and I haven't been upstairs in over a year and a half. So that's kind of the reality is you need to have the resources to adapt your living environment. My wheelchair itself is like a $70,000 piece of equipment, the one I'm sitting in now. It's an extension of me. It's my legs. And Medicare and private insurers don't cover these wheelchairs 100%. The VA does a fantastic job of taking care of veterans with ALS when it comes to equipment such as power wheelchairs. But for those of us that were not in the military, we have to pay quite a bit out of pocket. So we have to turn to public fundraising and crowdsourcing, crowdfunding to help us get the things we need, which isn't right. And then at some stage, like I am now, we need help just to do certain normal activities throughout the day. And so I have a caregiver that comes and spends time with me 8 hours a day while my wife is at work and my kids are at school because I can't open and close doors on my own. I can't prepare food on my own. There are certain toileting needs that I can't do on my own. So we have to pay out of pocket for those individuals. Medicare currently doesn't cover that because they don't see it as medically necessary, which I don't agree with and don't understand. And we have something in the works to help remedy that, but I'm not prepared to publicly speak about that. Yeah, so that's the financial 10,000-foot financial view.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're covering these things. So just to kind of recap some of this. First off, you're Phil Green and you're my friend and you have ALS. And there's a couple ways that ALS is confounding is there's not a specific yet reliable across the board test to say, do I have ALS or not? You have to go through a long path of specialists and schedules to get diagnosed. The disease moves quick. You told me the other day, I think it was 2 to 5 years on average, people are at end of life. So the disease is killing people almost faster than we can diagnose it. I mean, within, we're talking months. It's a lot of problems. It seems to attack people who are go-getters, type A personality people who oftentimes are rich. I mean, there's Steve Gleason. You guys are football players. There's a link there. There's a link to the military. All of these things. This disease does not want you to work out. It also doesn't want you to lay around to do nothing. You got to keep your muscles moving and everything. So that's sort of a basic breakdown. And by the way, you're watching the Break It Down show. If you want to subscribe, that'd be helpful. And go to PayPal and put a little bit of money in each month. That helps me keep the lights on and gets me on the road to go do some incredible things. And those that are to do that, thank you all so much. I appreciate you. All right. So Phil, what I wanted to ask you about now is, some people choose to fight and some people don't. And some people are in the middle where they're like, I want to fight up to this point and do what I can do. And then I want to call it. But legally, you're not always allowed to call it, especially if you get past the point. And I want to cover this a little bit too, is you're paralyzed, but you still can feel, you still can think. So like when we were traveling, I've got to hook my arm around your arm and yank you up and I can hurt you still. Like if I drop a sofa on your lap, you're going to be like, ow, that hurt. You dropped a sofa on my lap. Right. So your muscles don't activate, but you still can feel touch and everything. So there's this weird thing where your brain still is completely operational. And someone like Augie, who can barely move any muscle in his body, it literally just lays still all day long. But can feel sensations in their body. So let's talk a little bit about that and talk a little bit about the desire to fight and what that fight looks like. The desire to say, hey, this is my end. I'd like to die gracefully on my own terms. And then there's the folks that are like, and legitimately saying there's no real path out of this thing. Instead of fighting, instead of doing I'm just going to shut it down, accept my fate, and move on to the next thing, which is the end.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit there, but I think I can even weave them together in the concise, well, probably not so concise, but in a way that makes sense for people. So, as you indicated, you effectively become paralyzed in that you can't move certain limbs or your muscles basically become inoperable, if you can think of it that way. So, but your brain functions, as normal. There are some cases where people with ALS also have frontal temporal dementia, but I would say the majority of people with ALS still have their cognitive abilities intact. And you're able to feel and things like that. You're just not able to move. And I have friends, I have really good friends that don't want to be a burden. They want to go out on their own terms. At some point, I'm not going to be able to breathe on my own. My diaphragm, your diaphragm, it's a muscle. My diaphragm doesn't work like it used to. My breathing capacity is about 48% of what it used to be. So my breathing has been impacted in that way. And at some point, I'm not going to be able to breathe on my own. And so there's an interim solution where you get non-invasive ventilation where you would get a BiPAP, which is both positive and negative air pressure that essentially helps you breathe. And when you need more than that, you get, you get trach. And so you essentially get a hole put in your throat and you get a permanent tube attached to you, which my friend Steve Gleason has my friend Otto. I have friends that live for years and years after being um, put on permanent or invasive ventilation. And I have also friends that don't want to go through that process. And so in those cases, one of my friends is has scheduled or set up and arranged to die with dignity. And so that's one pathway out of this. And but with ALS, it's kind of an oxymoron, dying with dignity, because at least in the state of California, you have to be able to self-administer um, the essentially push the plunger on yourself, right? On the syringe. Well, I can barely type, right? And so imagine somebody said who's at the point where they're ready to check out. They most likely definitely do not have the ability to self-administer. So that puts you, the person with the disease, and the clinician that has agreed to help you, in a really awkward situation where they would have to break the law to help you die with dignity. So I have a friend who's suing the state of California to change that so that she can die with dignity on her own terms and not have to put her doctor in that position to break the law on her behalf.
Mm.
So that's, you know, I guess an oversight, or maybe the people that wrote that law don't quite understand how ALS works. And, maybe there should be an exemption for people that physically cannot administer the process on their own. Um, in my particular case, I want to fight. I want to continue. When I can no longer breathe uh, on my own, I want to get a trach. And when I become, um, when I lose the function that helps me be like where I even am today, and I'm only able to type with my eyes, and I can no longer move my arms, my legs at all. Um, that seems to me a good time to write a book. And I'll have plenty of time on my hands to write that with my eyes. And hopefully, I'm working on a project right now with some large technology players and Team Gleason to help people in that situation be able to communicate and type with their eyes in a much more efficient way. So instead of 16 words a minute, maybe we can type 40 words a minute. Um, can we double that using some sort of predictive text and things like that? So um, I'm hoping by the time I'm there, we have the ability to do it. But regardless, um, it seems like a great time to get my thoughts down. I've learned a lot so far in the 3 years I've been on this journey, and have connected with some of the top thought leaders in every aspect of this disease. And I would love to just kind of, seems like a good time to get my thoughts down on paper, and
Mhm.
maybe try and change the world. Um,
You might become, because of the ALS thing, you might become a fantastic game show contestant where you could rig some cheating in, because they've got to give you an allowance for time. Like, I'm typing with my eyes.
right,
Meanwhile, you do internet search, getting the answers, right? There can be
right.
some benefits.
My brain computer interface is automatically Googling the answers.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, your Neuralink. In your case, you've had it for about 3 years. and you're now bound to a wheelchair. But you're actually surprisingly from helping you on the trip, you're surprisingly independent. And one of the things I had to learn to do was to allow you to do the things that you can do, because again, it may be the last day you get to do that. So whether you're doing some bathroom functions, and I'm like, how much of this do you want to do on your own, or feeding yourself? But simple stuff like you keep your cards and money in a money clip. You cannot operate that money clip at all. You can't even put it in your pocket and pull it out. So I just kept it in my pocket the whole trip. And there's no like lack of independence there, because that's gone anyhow. But there are things that you want to do yourself. You can look at your own menu, for example, and you can hold it, you can look and decide. So you don't need me to do that for you. And so how quickly is your disease progressing? And talk about independence and dignity on a day-to-day setting, because there's things you can't do that, you know, you want to be able to do yourself, but you can't. And so you have to surrender that part of your life, whether you want to or not.
So my disease is progressing relatively slow, and there may be a really good reason for that. Um, I enrolled in a clinical trial about, I started the trial maybe 6 months, a little less than 6 months after I was diagnosed. So relatively early on in my disease progression. That particular clinical trial was for a company called Brainstorm. The treatment was called Neuron, which is a stem cell based therapy. The stem cells were um, from my own body, and they were created from bone marrow from my hip. And I was in that trial for pretty much the calendar year of 2019. And my disease progression, and I want to note that I don't know whether I was in the placebo or treatment arm of that particular trial yet. And but my disease did not progress while I was in that trial, or even up to 5 months after the trial. And after 5 months in 2020, I started progressing again. So I entered the trial. So I'm going to throw some numbers out at you. We use a scale called the ALS Functional Rating Scale to determine kind of where you're at and what you're able to do. 48 is the highest score possible. And my score when I went into the trial was a 33. My score 5 months after the trial in 2020 was still a 33. And then I started progressing again. And I now sit at a 27, but I fought long and hard. I went to the White House. I talked to many members of Congress to try and convince the government to open up a broad, expanded access for this particular therapy, so that not only me, but other people would get the opportunity to be on this therapy, and um, which many people in the community regard as, you know, something that represents, for those of us that don't have a known genetic mutation, the highest level of hope that we can have today in this disease. And um, I was one of 200 people that were in the trial globally. So I wanted to fight for more access for more people, but it's an expensive therapy. Estimates are it could be anywhere from $150,000 to $300,000 for 3 treatments. So, and I got treatments every other month. So every 2 months, you get a treatment. It's not a one treatment and you're cured or you're fixed. It's a maintenance treatment similar to dialysis or something like that. the mechanism's not the same as dialysis, but I'm just trying to give you a idea of frequency type. It needs to be a regularly scheduled procedure. The procedure, by the way, is, like I said, I had bone marrow harvested from my hip, and then every other month I would get a spinal tap, and the stem cells in the neurotrophic factor treated neuron or stem cells were injected into my spinal column, which is called the intrathecal delivery, just for you medical nerds out there. Um, so it's delivered intrathecally. So I've had probably 14 spinal taps in the last 3 years. They're not as bad as they're made out to be. And I was unsuccessful in getting the government to fund expanded access, but the company itself decided they would open up a small expanded access at the beginning of 2021. And they selected, or the sites, there were 6 sites throughout the country. And from what I understand, each site was allowed to choose 2 people that were in the trial at their site to participate. And I was one of the 12 people selected, and was one of the 10 people lucky enough to actually receive the 3 more treatments of this. So when I started this in treatment again in 2021, the beginning of the year, I was at 27. I'm still at 27. Uh, and what are we in October? So 9 months later, I'm still where I was when I entered. So I believe this particular therapy not only paused my disease progression again, but I also regained back some function in my hands that I had lost. So you were asking about independence. I had lost the ability to take my 30 some odd pills a day, which I take spread out 4 times throughout the day, and was dependent on somebody tossing them in my mouth and then helping me drink some water or whatever to get them down, to now I'm able to open up my pill box, pour out the pills that I need to take at any given time, pick them up with my fingers and put them in my own mouth, unscrew the cap on the water bottle that I'm using to drink it, drink and administer all this on my own, giving me back that independence. Now, that particular change would not have given me a different score on the ALS FRSR, but it's significant to me because now I'm independent again and I don't have to find somebody 4 times a day to help me take my pills. I've also noticed some strength back in my legs. I can, in my pool, I can do squats. I do 15 to 20 squats at a time. But when I first started doing them in the early spring, I I couldn't even stand up.
Yeah.
Couldn't straighten my legs in my pool. So I believe that I've gained some strength back in my legs. I can buckle and unbuckle my seatbelt in my van by myself. Um, Again, these don't seem like huge things to a normal person, but for me, they're huge wins. And I attribute it to this particular therapy, which has given me back some of that independence that you were talking about. And I can now, I was solely dependent on you help me transfer from one chair to another, like shower chair to my power chair,
Yeah.
from the bed to my chair. I needed somebody to push me. I couldn't do anything. And now I can do that. Once I have my slide board under me, I can move myself from one chair to the other.
Yeah.
So um, that's huge.
That's kind of funny that your triceps were the first indicator, but they seem to still have quite a bit of strength in them.
Yeah, I do some push-ups in the pool as well. You
Mhm.
know, granted, I'm pushing up on a 3-foot ledge, so they're kind of cheater push-ups, but I'll give
That's
myself that. That's a
Yeah,
win.
absolutely. Hey, I mean, anything you wanna call a win is a win by me. The other thing I wanna mention, you've talked before about the numbers of people who don't have access to a therapy because of the timeline, because of the protocol, uh, window not being open for them, and then also the fact that half the people are gonna get a placebo. And then I want you to also talk briefly about where the fight is. Obviously, the medical part of the fight is being taken on, and there's room to work there. But it seems like the government side of the fight, because people who have ALS pass so quickly, it's hard to get up. Like, how do you get to know enough people to open the doors if all of a sudden, like, no, that person who was working so hard on this and had fought this part of the fight is gone now, and now we have to go rebuild that bridge.
Yeah, and that's what happens. It's a revolving door of death, right? So somebody gets diagnosed, they get in the revolving door, and then they exit the backside by dying. And
Right.
it's just people just keep going through that revolving door. So the fight, so one of my primary objectives in fights is helping people get access to investigational therapies for ALS because if there are 30,000 people, estimated 30,000 people in the US with ALS, there are only about 1,500 people or spots that in clinical trials that these 30,000 people can get access to. So out of the 30,000, only 1,500 are really able to get access to investigational therapies and clinical trials, which is right now the only area we have or the only hope we have in trying to slow this disease down because we have two FDA approved therapies, which they're not, I don't consider them disease modifying. They may give me a couple months more, but as I've talked about, I believe my disease was paused for 10 months at a time. Well, that's pretty significant. So, how do we get more people access to these therapies until there are more FDA approved therapies for ALS? And the answer is through something called expanded access. So, for the the remaining 20 28,500 people, let's give them an opportunity to access some therapies through this FDA pathway called expanded access. Well, okay, here's the problem. Expanded access costs money, and most of the companies that are developing these investigational therapies in ALS, they are pre-revenue, they are small startups, and they struggle to raise enough money to have a clinical trial, let alone open up access to thousands of people. So we have developed or proposed legislation called Act for ALS that is in both the House and the Senate. In the House, there's something like 378 representatives that have co-sponsored this particular bill. It's HR 8662 in the House. And in the Senate, we're now, I think we have 29 Senate, might be 30 as of this morning, Senate co-sponsors for Senate Bill 4867. And what that particular bill does is it allows for and funds a granting mechanism through NIH, the National Institute of Health, so that a small biopharma company can apply for a grant, and small biopharma company that's developing an ALS therapy that's in clinical trial, they can apply to NIH for a grant to fund an expanded access program for that particular therapy. Now, we need to understand that it- any of these, like a trial or expanded access, most of the cost is in the operations of that. And so we're funding clinics, clinicians' time, a coordinator at the site. Um, the therapeutic that's in question typically is not the barrier here. So these grants would be used to fund these sites to administer the expanded access so that the people that need the therapies get access to the therapies. And um, we are encouraging a research component to it. So we're actually learning something about the broader ALS population that doesn't ever get a chance to participate in this type of research. So um, get out there and encourage your Senate senators, because that's where right now we have plenty of support in the House. Doesn't hurt to make sure your rep is on board, but in the Senate we need to make sure that they understand that without this support, we're not going to have broad expanded access programs in ALS. So people die without really having the opportunity to try a therapy. And like I said before, these investigational therapies are the only hope we have.
Yeah. And as we were all talking about trying not to kill people's grandma, here's a great way to do it. What does this stuff cost? Let's say the Senate says, all right, you got our support. Are they cutting a check for $10 million, $10 billion? What do you think this costs?
Um, well, so the program itself, it's about 75 million a year in granting. So an individual grant might be for a couple million,
Right.
or
This is not an insurmountable number, though. Not
no.
for the U.S. government. We blow $100 million on all kinds of stuff.
Somebody sneezes in the Capitol and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
they lose more money than ALS gets.
Absolutely. We'll lose $100 million worth of equipment and be like, that's just $100 million. Who cares, right?
Right. And
Well,
that
listen,
would be
yeah.
significant for our disease.
If we could do one thing, and this is my thing I'm going to ask for, then you get to ask for one thing. If we could do one thing, write your senators 2 letters, same letter, can just change the name on top, and just say, hey, I'd like you to talk about supporting this. My man, Phil, we can do better with folks that have ALS. People don't even have access to the dang treatments because there's just not enough of it. They don't have the right to try, Don't give me a damn placebo. Give me the full juice. What's going to happen? Am I going to die? Right. Phil, what would you ask for?
Mhm. Well, you can go to IMLS. It has a easy way to fill out, who you are, where you live, and then it will automatically craft that letter that you can edit and
So
send
easy.
it to your senators. But this is just one challenge that we have in front of us. For me, I'm also battling the FDA to be more flexible in how they evaluate therapies in ALS. We have 2 therapies right now that the FDA has said, no, we need more data. They
Jesus.
have since gone back on one of them. So there's a company called Amylyx. They have a drug or a therapeutic called AMX0035. They have now said, oh, you know, we're sorry. Please come back and you can now submit a new drug application that we'll review. And that was after the ALS community. I think there was a petition signed by over 50,000 people saying this is ridiculous. You need to expedite approval of this therapy. And then the same thing, the therapy that I received, the FDA said we don't have enough data. Well, I mean, the phase 3 trial didn't hit the. So okay, I know we're running short on time, but we have a clinical trial is essentially an experiment where you are proving a theory that you have to state before the trial starts. And so in ALS, you're basically saying this therapy has to help do X to this many people, and you're essentially using your best guess to reach for what that theoretic target is. And if your trial does not meet that, then your trial failed. So now we're in a situation where we have a therapy that has helped at least 30% of the people that received it pause their progression or do better. And the FDA is saying, no, we need more data because you didn't hit your probability value, your p-value. And so what I'm trying to do is change how the FDA looks at ALS clinical trials so that it's not a one size fits all. And if you don't hit that, what you theorized before the trial, that it's not a failure, because if your trial actually proves to help some people, we're people. We're not lab rats or mice, we're people. And if the therapy helps people in the disease that is 100% terminal, why are we not approving it for these people? It makes zero sense. We need common sense in ALS drug approval process. And I like to say, it didn't hit the p-value, but you know what? It hit the me value. It worked for me, and that should be good enough.
If there's one person at FDA or at Health and Human Services that you could talk to, whose door are we knocking on?
Well, I'm already knocking on their doors, and I'm talking to them. I have a call this week with the FDA, and I will be presenting some information. I have a call with NIH in a couple weeks, so I don't want to disclose too much, but
Yeah.
we're already having those conversations. The trick is getting them to do more than listen. They tell you what they think you want to hear. They look like they're listening, but until we see action on the other side, the action speaks much louder than anything they would say in a meeting that we're in. I've been to FDA headquarters. I've sat across from the then commissioner. I email the current acting commissioner on a regular basis. It's not a lack of access, it's a lack of action.
All right, let me know when you want to go on the road. I'll help you knock on some doors. And by that, I mean, I'm going to put my shoulder on it and blast through and be like, here comes Phil. And then we're going to go in there and we're going to do what we do. All right, anything in closing? Otherwise, I'm going to shut this thing down, man.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to jump on here and use this as a platform to help raise awareness about the disease, and take about 30 or 40 minutes to talk about some of the challenges and problems that we face on a daily basis that we're trying to change. And any support, primarily in getting support for Act for ALS, would be extremely helpful. And I'm an open book, so anytime we need to do this again, I'm more than happy to jump on here.
And Phil, I always have time. You're the one with short time. I got plenty of time. Anytime you want to come on, you're on the show. All you got to do is say, I want to be on. All right, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.